You want to hit the, well, there we go. Good afternoon, everybody, on this rainy day. You know, I guess we needed some more rain, so here it is. But I do thank everybody for joining us this afternoon for our Student Achievement Committee meeting. And I did just want to say that we do have Chair Sutton, Vice Chair Mahaffey, board members Kushner, Carter, Cash are in attendance, and board members Monica Johnson-Hustler, Dr. Jim Martin, and Chris Haggerty are all joining us virtually. And again, we thank everybody for the opportunity to have virtual attendees as well as in person so we can continue our business all together. And I thank everybody for being here this afternoon. Today we are going to be hearing from our magnet and curriculum enhancement updates. As you can recall, last year we were looking to expand our magnet program. We'll be receiving some updates about that information, and then an extraordinarily thorough presentation on behavioral health practices and mental health services in Wake County, and also policies, both local and state, that impact those. So I hope everybody can absolutely tune into all of it, but that second part is very, I'm looking forward to, because it's extraordinarily comprehensive. So I appreciate that. But so that we can move forward, if I could please entertain a motion to approve the January 25th minutes.
Chair, I move approval of the minutes from January.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. So we had a motion to approve from Christine Kushner and a second from Karen Carter. And all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. And the minutes are approved. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McFarland so he can provide a little bit more information today before we move into our first presentation. Thank you so much.
Well, Ms. Scott, you did an outstanding job of introducing the group, so thank you. Yes, we do have Magnet here. Wade Martin and Kimberly Lane are going to kick off the first presentation with a lot of information talking about the Magnet principles, showcasing some Magnet programs, and then updating information to the board around the grant, and then they'll have some time for dialogue. And then in our second presentation, it is around behavioral health practices and mental health services in the district. And it will provide an overview of the importance of mental health. And then, as you said, there will be some laws and policies that will be talked about. There will be some specific examples shared. And then toward the end of the presentation, we're going to narrow in and focus on just a very specific piece of mental health support in our district, Alliance Healthcare. So it starts really broad and then takes us all the way to a very specific piece of work in our behavioral health in the district. So I'm going to turn it over now to Wade Martin and Kimberly Lane. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. McFarland.
Thank you.
Katrina, if you could start that presentation, I would greatly appreciate it. Ms. Merrill, are you going to be presenting the presentation, broadcasting it? There we go. Thank you so much. So good afternoon, Chair Scott, Superintendent Moore, and board members. We are very excited to provide an update to the Student Achievement Committee today about the exciting work happening in our Magnet and Curriculum Enhancement Office. As Dr. McFarland mentioned, with me today is Kimberly Lane, our new Senior Director in the Magnet and Curriculum Enhancement Office. Ms. Lane will be presenting today's update to the committee, and following her presentation, myself and her entire Magnet team has joined us today, and we will all be available to respond to any questions that you may have. At this time, Ms. Lane, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, and thank you, Chair Scott and board members, Dr. McFarland, for having us today. I'm excited to talk about our magnet programs. So we did have an agenda planned for you today, and I think just going over this briefly, defining our purpose of magnet schools, showcasing what's been going on with our magnet programs, certainly highlighting what's been happening with magnet teaching and learning in the midst of COVID. And then updating our Magnet School Assistance Grant status. And as Mr. Martin said, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. We always like to start, I think this is kind of our grounding mechanism, is our principles for magnet programs for the district. They're important components of a district-wide initiative so that we are looking for our magnet programs to reduce high concentrations of poverty, provide diversity, especially around school integration, maximize use of school facilities, and then providing those innovative and expanded educational opportunities that are so important for our students as they're exposed to our learning environments that adapt and are ever changing. Just wanted to highlight a little bit of our work with each of these principles in terms of reducing high concentrations of poverty. We certainly work very closely with our student assignment office as well as our data research and accountability, and always want to give them a shout out because this is work that goes hand in hand for the work that in terms of our magnet applications and our student assignments, determining the draw areas, looking at our socioeconomic status in terms of how we assign students. As we are aware, free and reduced lunch status is something that we're always looking at in terms of aligning this priority. With the current times, our FRL is not as accurate as it has been in the past. We recognize that we have lots of students in our virtual learning environments that families who may not have applied for free and reduced lunch status. So that is something that we're working with closely with student assignment and as I said, data research and accountability to look at what other metrics we could use. I did want to share about the promoting diversity, the school integration piece, certainly the work with RTI International, as we understand that they're going to be closing out their work with the district in the next month or so. But wanted to share a couple of other things that were going on with this work around school integration that's bigger than just our magnet programs. So Wake County is part of a collaborative group called the Bridges Collaborative that actually is housed out of the Century Foundation. And many of you know the name Richard Kallenberg. My lights go off in my office, so forgive me. I have to wave my hands to get them to come back on. Richard Kallenberg and the work, certainly he's done a lot of work in Wake, and we're part of one of 57 school districts, housing entities, charter schools across the nation that are building this national coalition around school integration. So certainly pulling in research, best practices across different districts. So we have had 3 sessions now where we're learning from each other. And this has been an opportunity for our team, who's comprised of Dr. Trice, Mr. Martin, Tamani Anderson-Powell on our team, Glenn Carrozza, and me, to learn more about what's happening in other districts. And there's some districts as large as Miami-Dade, Los Angeles, so lots of opportunity to learn from other places. There are links in the PowerPoint when you get these, so you can go out and look for a little bit more information. Also wanted to call attention to the National Coalition on School Diversity, and this is really the research arm of the work around school integration that's powerful as we do this work. But of important note here is the Biden-Harris education agenda. And what's really fascinating is that they have specifically mentioned the use of magnet schools in terms of doing this work around school integration and the importance of it. So that's a good read, too, that I would encourage you to check out. Certainly, as part of Mr. Martin's team and the maximizing use of school facilities, we're working with student assignment on target seats for our magnet programs, but also with long-range planning, certainly virtual academy and how that plays a role in our work this year, and certainly moving forward is part of those conversations that impact this priority. And last, but certainly not least, is the opportunity our magnet programs provide for innovative and expanded educational opportunities that benefits all students. And I've just got to share a real quick story. I was out and about this weekend. I've been working on my doctorate, and I finally finished chapter 4 and 5. I haven't defended yet, but I've got it written and on paper, and I decided I was going to go splurge and buy something for myself. So I walked into a store, a jewelry store, and the lady behind the counter happened to be a product of Wake County magnet programs. And without me even asking a question, she just started telling me what she gained by being part of the magnet program and how it enriched her world and how it's helped her with her own children. And I just love to hear those kinds of stories that show evidence to the work that we do every day. I didn't buy anything, but I did get to talk to her. It just so happens that February, Dr. McFarland, maybe that's why we asked to be on the agenda in February, is the Magnet School Month. So I was going to share just a little information from National Magnet Schools of America. In true transparency, I do serve as the Region 4, on the Region 4 director, board of directors for magnet schools, and just give you some data points in terms of the volume of students that we serve. Last week, well, week before last now, I guess, we had our policy conference, and usually that's where Awake teams join with other MSAP grant recipients on Capitol Hill to actually go visit with our legislative, to talk with Congress about funding, to thank them for their support. And this year we did it, but we did it virtually. And I will be pleased to note that Tila and Tasha and Cindy DeFore were on our team this year, and we had 4 legislative visits. So that was a wonderful opportunity for us to showcase the great things happening, not just across the country in magnet schools, but specifically here in Wake County. We like to, as we're showcasing our programs, we also like to shout out accomplishments. And this slide recognizes our magnet principals who have come on board since the beginning of this school year or who have moved during the school year. And it's always exciting when we see folks that have been in magnet schools previously and are either coming back or they change levels and continue in the magnet programs. So we do want to get a shout out to these principals, as well as the principals of our new magnet schools. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Dillard Elementary, Dillard Middle, East Cary in just a few minutes. But we wanted to give those principals a shout out. Elena Ashburn, Dr. Ashburn, is our principal of the year for the county, but also the regional winner. So certainly celebrating her accomplishments. And Dr. Chavis and Kim Grant have recently left the magnet schools to come to central office. So big shout out to all of these folks as we welcome them and celebrate with them. We came and visited with the board in January to give you an update on our numbers through the end of December and comparing that to last year's numbers. So we did want to show you the numbers at the end of the application window, which was January the 28th. So here are the magnet year-round school numbers and our early college numbers. And the early college numbers did not change because that deadline had already passed. The next slide will break that down into grade spans in terms of the numbers that we had applicants for this year versus last year. And of course, you do see a decrease. We had mentioned, as I said, the early colleges earlier with a 28% decrease. Our elementary, middle, and high also saw decreases as we anticipated. I do want to call attention to all the great things that happened with recruitment. We had a chance last week to meet with our magnet principals, and several of them have shared out, as well as the magnet coordinators, have shared out that while the numbers are down a bit, they've had some of the strongest, best recruiting season they've ever had. And as we're starting to pull best practices, we're thinking about how do we blend this into a hybrid model for next year. They said things like they had chance to really get to know families, to really delve into more intently with small groups of families talking about their school and their programs. So lots of positive that have come out of the recruitment. We also tried, as we shared with you in January, to do lots of different recruiting events to adapt to this virtual world. So certainly our Magnet Fair and many fairs were all held virtually. Our team in the office were holding parent meetings, working with our Magnet School principals and coordinators to really try to buffer this recruitment season. Certainly want to pull out and recognize all of our magnet programs. And for me, this is just a chart I had not seen that looked a little different in my view, and it just really helped me wrap my head around how many different programs we have at the different levels. So I do want to call your attention to the total is 59, and we have 54 magnet schools, but we do have different programs. Some of our schools have more than one program, so that's why it's noted as it is here. But when you look across our gifted and talented, our leadership and technology, international baccalaureate, now with our addition to our global studies and language immersion, early colleges, we have a few that we've got to develop that K-12 pathway a little bit more intently. Those are the unique or the new ones. But I think this gives us some insight as we start thinking, as Ms. Scott said earlier, about new magnet programs and what things might be of interest. We do send out a survey at the end of the application season to all of our applicants, asking them questions about their experience with applying, but also just trying to pull in some information about if we were to do additional programs, what would be of interest to you and your children. So gathering that kind of data will help us as we move forward in thinking about a next grant cycle, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Did want to share and highlight some of our specifics in terms of magnets teaching and learning. And again, this is just the highlights of our programs broken down by theme. And I'll let you read the program highlights. But what I want to call your attention to is the adaptations that our magnet educators, that our magnet coordinators and principals have done, who have been very intentional about making sure, even in the midst of COVID, that our students and families were getting what we promised them, but we're also getting that high quality, innovative, expanded learning options that are so powerful for our magnet students. So for example, in our gifted and talented programs, a part of our claim to fame are the number of electives that are offered, and staff worked from the summer trying to figure out how to make scheduling work and how to offer electives, and ensuring that we could do dance and orchestra and chorus virtually. We could do the music virtually. We've had lots of students share out some of their wonderful experiences of being able to learn in that kind of environment and yet engage collaboratively. Our leadership and technology, we think about things like the project-based learning and our community partnerships, things that we intentionally build around applied learning, hands-on, interactive, engaging. And certainly that was a challenge as we started thinking about moving into the virtual world. But again, our educators were phenomenal, and they would, just like our parents were picking up textbooks and resources, sometimes we had design bags ready for families to pick up. They were helping students figure out what they could find out in their yards or in their own home. So lots of creative lesson planning and opportunities in that respect. IB, global schools, language immersion certainly gives us an opportunity for that global lens. World language our newest magnets. Again, we'll share a little bit more about what's happening there. But here are university connections, very specialized electives. So again, the scheduling, making sure our students were still able to engage in these courses virtually, but also having an opportunity, because of the applied learning lens, to really help students see the impact of this global pandemic, of how it's not just impacting Wake County in North Carolina and the United States, but how it's impacting the world. And certainly nothing probably tells our students how this is impacting us more than exams and testing. And because the International Baccalaureate program is internationally tested and an international curriculum program, those impacts that we've seen nationwide and how they've been willing to adapt to this global pandemic has been pretty tremendous, and we're really appreciative of that partnership. Our STEM highlights, I mentioned earlier about some of the project-based learning or the inquiry lessons, the labs, the maker spaces, those sorts of things have had to adapt to virtual environments and field trips being virtual. And what's really interesting is a lot of these resources, these elements that our teachers have been using have been there, and we've had access to them, but it just, sometimes we didn't have the time to add that in, or it was a nice want to. We think the pandemic has given us the intentionality with which we are embedding not just the use of a computer, but the actual technological advances that the computer gives us for our students. So those virtual field trips, the virtual community partnerships, having summer camps held entirely virtually, professional development being virtual. So it's really been a learning process, and again, something we don't want to lose moving forward, because the virtual environment has given us a lot of opportunity to connect in ways that sometimes maybe we wouldn't have been able to connect otherwise. Our early colleges, certainly the impact of our lab courses, the college level courses, working with the college partners, transportation for our early colleges, and lots of intricate details in making that work. And our, again, our administrators, our educators, the college staff have been very adaptive and helped us strengthen that partnership of recognizing each other's needs. Continuing to do some business partnerships virtually. I had a chance to visit almost all of our early colleges, and it's been pretty incredible seeing the things that are happening. When some of our other students weren't in the building, many of these lab courses were, and the students were on rotations and making sure they could meet the requirements of their course. So I'm going to pause for just a minute and kind of add some context here. And this is around kind of the status update of the Magnet School Assistance Grant. The board heard our recommendation. I'll show you the timeline in just a minute about applying for the Magnet School Assistance Grant in 2020. Part of the work around the MSAP grant is the intentionality with which it does work towards school integration, so that those words highlighted in bold there are key priorities and purposes of the MSAP grant. I gotta get my light back on. Sorry about that. These lights are wonderful. They save power, except when you're in the middle of a presentation, and they keep going out. So those are just the key parts, the systemic reforms while we're meeting the state standards. Again, the innovation, drawing, attracting that diversity, and increased choices for our students. The next slide just briefly lists some of the other parts: the marketable career, college to career goals, professional transferability of skills, making sure our magnet schools are operating, and our board has been very intentional, and we are greatly appreciative of all the work and support that you give the programs, making sure that they do continue at a high level. and then ensuring students have that equitable access and they can succeed academically. And as I was sharing with you earlier about the story, it's really interesting. The longer I'm in Wake, the more of those stories I hear, and people are just sharing what great experiences they've had. And that's always certainly a marketing tool, but something you want to hear because you feel like your work is being valued and appreciated. So I set all that up to say, as we start to think about the current grant that we're still waiting to hear, we're always thinking forward. So we're always planning for the next grant cycle. So when we came to the board with the 2020 grant cycle, normally we would know that by October the 1st. So the application was due usually around mid-February, April. This one was delayed just a bit, and it was submitted in late April, early May. Because of the budget process that was going on in Congress, the budget wasn't approved. The U.S. Department of Ed did not send out any information about the grant funding as of October the 1st. So we have yet to hear, and kind of what happened after the grant or after the budget cycle, once the budget was finally approved in late December. At that point, there was a new administration coming in. So the Department of Ed was continuing to hold those funds. If you'll go to the next slide, please, Ms. Merrill. Thank you. So normally, as we start into the fall, we're working with our schools because we would have received notice. So this year, we moved forward with implementing the language immersion global studies that you'll see in just a minute with our 4 new programs, still awaiting word on the grant status. In our policy conference for Magnet Schools of America a couple of weeks ago, we did hear from the Department of Ed. And the information that we received is that they are still awaiting word to be able to notify those recipients. So we are still very hopeful and working closely with Cindy DeFore in our grants office and certainly with our colleagues across the country to know something as soon as we possibly can. So we're, again, remaining hopeful. But as we remain hopeful, it's also the time that we start planning for the 2022 cycle. So the grant application typically will come out either late December of this year or early January. We like to get about a year start on trying to get some market data, gathering some of that information I mentioned from our application surveys, and bringing that information to the board in the spring so we start to look at specific schools to be identified in the grant. So just wanted to revisit that kind of timeline and the components of the grant to just give you a sense of what's going to be coming forward as we move more into the spring, as we find out about the 2020 grant, but also as we start planning for the 2022. I did want to make a note on this one slide before we go on. There's another italics there. In November, as we were implementing the programs in our global studies and world language schools, we did have some hiccups in terms of getting international teachers. We have a partnership with the Participate organization where we bring in international teachers, not just for our magnet programs, but across the district. And because of the ban on travel, that became a little bit of a difficulty to secure teachers that weren't already in the country working. So we did have some success as the restrictions have lifted. We have a new teacher at Dillard Elementary School that joined us, I believe, in January. And we're excited about the possibility of this work continuing moving forward because this is an important component in terms of our world language teachers. So the 4 new schools in the 2020 grant are Dillard Magnet Elementary School, Center for World Languages and Spanish Immersion, and Dillard Middle, Magnet Middle School, Center for World Languages and Global Studies. And I wanted to highlight for you just a little bit, and it's not a little bit, it's a lot of work that goes in visioning strategically planning for these programs, as well as developing new logo. Our Magnet office team worked very closely with the schools and the Magnet coordinators and the principal and their staff to really try to capture the essence of these new programs in their marketing and promotion. So they've been marketing their program. You see the dragonfly for Dillard Elementary, the dragons for Dillard Middle. We always want to scream the theme, not just in terms of our marketing pieces, but when you walk in the building. So hopefully, when we're all able to go back in the buildings again, you can walk in and you can really sense the theme within the buildings of these programs. Our other two programs, East Cary, Magnet Middle School Center for World Languages and Global Studies, and Smith, Magnet Elementary, which was already an International Baccalaureate primary years program, but we did add the Spanish immersion component for Smith, Magnet Elementary. The next couple of slides really break down school by school in terms of what the programs are offering for world languages, for global studies, and Spanish immersion. So in Dillard Elementary, certainly working toward that daily world language for all of the students. They're offering French and Spanish. The cultural impact, the cultural integration of that is very important for the whole school community. Electives built around the global studies, certainly always connected to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, or Essential Standards. And then the Spanish immersion is a smaller component of a bigger program with our first kindergarten cohort scheduled to begin August of this year. And we're very, very excited about the application numbers and the results of that. So certainly working toward looking at 2 kindergarten programs eventually. That may even happen as soon as this fall. So lots of great things happening at Dillard Elementary. Dillard Middle, again, is working toward daily world language for all of their 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I do want to jump you over to the Spanish immersion column because thinking about this is the middle school connection. So our elementary school students are going to come through the pipeline and then come to the middle school to start participating in the Spanish immersion. And when I looked at this, it says begins 27-28, class of 2034. And I don't know about you, but I had to really do the math to make sure that was working because it seems so far away, and yet it's going to happen before we know it. And building that K-12 pipeline for these programs is vitally important, and that's something that was missing previously. So we feel like these elementary to middle connections can then give the high school world languages even more opportunity for students to hone in on those special skills and talents. East Cary will have world languages, again, working toward daily world language and the global studies component with the electives and the cultural language aspect embedded throughout the school culture. Last but not least is Smith, and as I mentioned, they're already an IB PYP program, and that gives a little bit information about the IB program, but then adding in the world languages and the Spanish immersion. Again, the first cohort scheduled to start this fall, August of 21. And that's what's happening in the magnet world. We feel like there's a lot of great things going on. We know that you probably have questions for us. So as Mr. Martin said, the team is here and are ready to address any of your comments or questions. Thank you for giving us this time.
Ms. Lane, thank you so much for that presentation. Our magnet schools are so important, and they are one of the many things that makes the Wake County Public School System a very special place. I'm sure my colleagues do have questions, so I will also try to monitor online questions as well, but I saw Chair Sutton's hand.
Thank you, Mrs. Scott, and thank you for the presentation, staff. My question is one around emerging magnet themes, and wanted to ask about culturally responsive curriculums. And a culturally responsive curriculum, there's a lot of research, that's, of course, that has been where culturally responsive curriculums have been used as a strategy for school transformation. And there's a subtle, well, maybe it's both subtle and stark differences between a culturally responsive curriculum and that of the IB, the world languages, which also sort of revolve or center on culture and differences in culture. But the culturally responsive curriculum, particularly used as a strategy for school transformation, focuses more around student-based learning and using cultural knowledge, experiences, frames of reference, performance styles, particularly of ethnically diverse students, and typically uses those to make learning more appropriate and effective for our ethnically diverse students. I don't know that we've, and I'm looking towards Superintendent Moore as well, I don't know that we've ever really used a culturally responsive curriculum in Wake County. And is that something that we could consider perhaps as a magnet theme? And again, particularly perhaps as a strategy for school transformation as well?
There's a lot in that question. I do think that, and I'm going to segment it just a bit. So first, I think we need to, there's a piece around how we look at innovative themes for schools that are appropriate depending on the different types of target audiences that we may have. I think the question about a culturally responsive curriculum actually applies to maybe every single one of our schools and the extent to which there is space in all of our schools for what that looks like. And an example really would be what's happened with EL in the English language arts curriculum over the last few years. And the intent, right, the intent of the work it is that we're trying to do. So yes, maybe to what you're saying, but we need to unpack a couple of other questions specifically about what the role and the target would be and how it is situated within our overall academic program. So, I know that Edward and some of his team are listening as well, and that's certainly something they can carry back and take a look at to see how it works.
Thank you for that.
Ms. Mahaffey?
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Lane, for that presentation. I appreciate the fact that you all are meeting with different departments to help see where there are gaps, how we can help, and how we can get more priority applicants. The first question I had was looking at the enrollment and seeing how many folks have applied, and I know that we send a survey about the experience to folks who applied to the Magnet program. Do we poll people who attended the Magnet Fair, and I mean attended, not signed up for, but attended the Magnet Fair and then chose not to apply to learn maybe what some of the barriers to not going to the Magnet program are?
That's a great question, and that's something we have talked with Data Research and Accountability about developing. Because getting our applicant view is just one stakeholder lens. So to your point, yes, we have that registration information from the Magnet fairs. We could cross-reference it since it was virtual. They did have to register. So we might be able to do some cross-referencing. But we're also looking at doing some community-wide surveying. So working with Dr. McMillan and his team to try to think about what that might look like.
And I know, just anecdotally, we've heard that transportation can sometimes be a barrier, and I'm curious if working with the transportation department to look at express stops and where they're placed. I know that's done by transportation, but just trying to be more strategic is in the future. And prior to Ms. Lane and Mr. Martin coming on board, we had talked about potentially working with the Y in priority regions to offer potentially childcare for Magnet families so that people could access before and after school care outside of their Magnet school. So they're not, if they're working in RTP, but the Magnet school's in Raleigh, potentially that's a barrier. But again, that's anecdotal. That's not looking at survey data to inform that?
So that's a great point too, and transportation is certainly something that we have connected with on multiple different venues since I've been on board the last few months. But that is a conversation we're having with our student assignment and our transportation folks. As a matter of fact, that's on my list this week to schedule that meeting, because we do need to look at some of those express stops, some places where we have neighborhood stops that we may not need them. So trying to support their efficiency rating, but also recognizing that as we do magnet programs, that's not going to be as efficient in terms of transportation. So really helping voice what we're hearing from our constituents and from our stakeholders about the need for greater transportation. So now the why childcare, I love that idea. I think that's certainly something I'll add to my list in terms of engaging with our community partners to see how we might be able to expand those opportunities. But that's a great idea.
Thank you.
And thank you for raising that again, Ms. Mahaffey, because that is such an important consideration of making sure we're linking with transportation for that, and even beyond the why, if we have express stops at neighborhood, the places that have larger clubhouses or where other community partners can come in and provide some type of supervision and activities for those children. Thank you so much for that. Ms. Carter?
So could I add to that
sorry.
too? One of the things that we're thinking about too is to try to engage the public transportation system as well. So not just our own district transportation department, but looking at where we might be able to build in, again, those community agencies around public transportation. So that's going to take a little bit more time, but that is something that we've been discussing.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that as well. Ms. Carter, did I see your hand?
Sorry. Well, some of them have been covered, but I just had a question. I noticed on the application numbers, there was the magnet and year-round combined. Is there anything separate with that for the numbers? Like, is there more of a decline in the magnet or more of a decline in the year-round schools? Do we know offhand, or?
I'm glad to get that information. I did not separate it out that way because that's the way that student assignment shared the numbers with me.
Okay.
But we could certainly look at that. That's a good point.
Okay. And then is there any way to kind of pulling more from that to look at if there's any schools or areas in particular where the decreases were saw? Like the application, like, particular schools or particular areas, if we could look at that maybe. I know you don't have that now, but.
And that's a support mechanism we want to build in, because that's something we always do after the application period ends, is really look at that. That's part of our own internal evaluation, is to see how those applications came in. So yes, that's a support arm that we will make sure that happens.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all this information.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Ms. Cash?
Yeah, I had numerous questions, but I'll try to tie it up here. So I think we did anticipate a decrease in our magnet seats, which was tough to follow. And I know we've had a recruitment program. So again, I don't think we can answer this now, but I think whether as a board we want to talk about this more, or whether we're going to talk with student assignment, but there are a considerable number of our magnet student families that needed to do something for childcare in the last year that might want to come back to our magnet programs when we are going in person. That were very strong families in our magnet schools. So I don't know that we've left any opportunities for that. I think that over the years we've worked real hard to get our magnet population built up, and some of these families had working conditions where they couldn't figure out anything else. So if they could come back, I wonder how we could talk about that as a board. So that's a question I don't think maybe we can answer in this committee, but maybe we could follow up on that. Another thing is that when the magnet programs were first started and were very, very strong in Wake County, no matter how big we got, 59 programs would have been alarming to most board members because it's a real concern whether you water down program selections or whether you are really what we're doing with our magnet program. So my question is, and again, I don't know if this is for our people that are directing the meeting today, but I'm not totally sure whether we are just mainly doing program enhancement or we're doing both program enhancement in our schools and we're using magnet schools to make our schools healthy. It looks like maybe we're doing both, like some of our programs are bringing kids in and or keeping kids in a school, which is why we call them magnet. And some of our magnet schools are program driven to enhance what is already there, not necessarily changing the population of the school. Now, is that something that we can look at later, or is that something we know now with the number of programs we have?
You mean which or which?
Yeah.
I think we'd have to take a look at both the goals and the impact. So that's going to require a little bit more work because, there's also the for most of our magnet programs, other than AIG, all magnet programs are for all students in the schools. So we would need to take a look at what the numbers sort of break out across the programs, and I'm sure we don't have that today.
So I definitely, it is for all the kids in the school, but I would like to know how many of our schools are really serving a purpose for diversity. Now, I know year-round was originally started for capacity. That was the purpose of it. And so I break that out a little differently. But magnets were started to keep our schools healthy and to populate schools that had too many seats open, of course. And so I would really like to know, in fact, how many of our schools are serving that original purpose. And if it's trying to serve that original purpose, is it actually serving that purpose? And I think we've talked about this a few times, looking for those numbers, so I think that we'd have to dig.
Well, I think this actually aligns with potentially some next steps that we've talked about, that Edward has talked about in terms of, because part of what you're asking for is a review of the extent to which magnet programs are meeting the objectives. And I think that is actually a next step that we have discussed as leadership.
Okay, and then another question I had, is that okay? Another question I had, does the leadership in each of our magnet schools, have they totally, as that principal and mainly principal and the leadership of that school, do they buy into the program that they are being put into that school based on their theme? I think that's really important. That was a big goal. I think Superintendent Moore knows when we built the magnet programs, it was important.
It is important, but go ahead.
Superintendent Moore, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it is an important component. As we interview and seek folks to fill positions in magnet programs, and as an addition, when we magnetize or change the theme of a program, we go back to the drawing board with administration and the staff to say, is this something that you're on board with doing, or do we provide other options for folks? So we've been doing that also as we remagnetize or change the theme of schools. But I'll let Ms. Lane say anything else that she has about that.
I just think what Superintendent Moore and the question actually speaks to the importance of that school leadership. So we are looking at how we can continue to support that with very intentional professional learning that's targeted to our magnet leaders. Research across the country tells us, just as you noted, that for our magnet programs to be successful, those principals are key players. So making sure that we are supporting them on an ongoing and regular basis, not just at the inception of a program, but that we're continuing to support their leadership development and what that looks like. And we actually have a couple of things planned for our principals in the next couple of months to start doing some of that work.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. One last question. I see gifted and talented programs. I do not see AIG Basics specifically listed. Do we have AIG Basics magnet programs?
So they actually fall under that theme. That's why I didn't spell them out separately. So they're connected to that gifted and talented theme. So, but yes, they're
Okay,
in that.
yeah, they used to not be, so I just wanted to be sure. It was used to be very different. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cash. And Ms. Kushner, I see you, but I'm going to switch over to Dr. Martin online if that's okay. Thank you so much for your patience. Dr. Martin.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Two quick questions. First, thank you for the data on the applicants. We saw that number is down. What is your sense in terms of how that's going to translate into acceptance numbers? You indicated that in the magnet fair, or the virtual magnet process, there were a lot of relationships built. Does that mean we expect more acceptance to offers? Do we expect the applicant to acceptance to change? Stay about the same? What are the thoughts there?
I can't wait to see the results of that because of that very connection that our principals and our magnet coordinators have talked about. I think our sense is that because there has been more individualized support, that there may be stronger commitment. So it's going to be nice to see how those numbers play out.
So what's our sense there? Are we thinking that we're going to be able to fill a majority of our magnet seats, or we're going to have a lot of them left empty?
Tamani, you want to step in and answer that? I think we can say we anticipate having the majority of them filled, and I know we're working with student assignment to make sure we continue to pull those students in, but we also have, Tamani can speak to our second chance opportunities, if you will.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me today. I just finished a meeting with Glenn Carozza in student assignment where we are looking at that very thing, Dr. Martin. How many seats are open? Because, of course, remember, selection for those seats, regardless of maybe the number of applicants, is still aligned with the purpose of creating that diversity. And so what we always look to do is to increase the number of target applicants or those who will fill those priority magnet seats. And so we're looking at that to be sure we filled as many as we can fill in a school with priority applicants. We are also looking to offer some second chance opportunities, maybe for families who were not enrolled or who have moved here new. You know, some families have been here, but just maybe were reluctant to enroll early. So we're going to try to capitalize on priority applicants who were not selected for their first choice school and see if we can offer them something that's comparable, a similar theme. We also will work to identify families who have recently enrolled, whether they moved here new or they've just enrolled. Be sure that we can fill as many of those seats with priority applicants as we can. So that is something we will continue to work on with student assignment.
And
Thank you. We look forward to the information.
there's also the wait list, correct? I know
That
a
is correct.
family that got pulled off the wait list in May of last year.
Yep. So this year, we're going to try to do the wait list a little earlier. We're going to hold on to that wait list a little longer over into the summer, and so that we can continue to look at seats as families make other decisions. Of course, you know, families that are maybe looking at us are also considering some other things. As those families consider other things, we'll go back to that applicant pool. I use the word applicant pool because I want everybody to know it's not a numeric list, but it is an applicant pool. So we will continue to go back to that applicant pool as well.
And Tamani, I think you just spoke to something that we're doing intentionally in all of our schools with having welcome events for our families so that we are welcoming them into the magnet family and trying to keep them here so they don't make other choices. So that recruitment doesn't end once they go through the application process. We continue to work with them and try to bring them into the school's family.
Thank you. We'll look forward to that continuing update. My second question is more thinking about sort of our long-term strategy. I think Ms. Cash sort of pointed to this as well. really trying to think about how many of our magnet programs are, fulfilling the goal, the intended goal, with their multiple goals, but particularly the goal of integration, increasing diversity, and whatnot. So I guess my question there is, what is our thinking going forward, more looking at some of the 2A magnets? So much of our historic magnet program has been trying to attract wealthier families into our lower wealth schools. I know that we don't have the same capacity always in our higher wealth schools, but if we really believe in the integration, if we really believe in this work, like I've often said, magnets have two poles, and right, you got you bring two magnets together, pole to pole, then they're repulsive, but pole to opposite pole, they're attractive. And we want to work on that attractive, but that means going in both directions. And we really have not focused on the direction of the lesser opportunity student to higher opportunity school. We've usually gone the other direction. So, I think there's some space to creatively think going forward. I mean, like Ms. Cash noted, 59 magnet schools is a big number of schools, and we do want to make sure that magnets are not just, layering opportunity where opportunity currently exists. But I think it's really important that we use it as this, tool for voluntary integration. So can we think a little bit more strategically, or maybe I'm asking that we do think a little more strategically long-term, about sort of what we've historically called the 2A magnet, that's getting a little bit of that other direction, instead of just pulling, just creating programming to attract the wealthy folks, the opportunity-rich folks. Can we create some programming that is much more focused on creating opportunity for those who didn't have as much?
Dr. Can I speak to this really quickly?
Sure.
So, Dr. Martin, the selection priorities for a couple of our magnet schools, we piloted this a little bit, is to have some set-aside seats for families whose selection priorities are lower. So we are working and trying to make that shift when a school's base assigned area maybe changes a little bit so that it's a little higher wealth, and we want to continue to attract diverse populations. So we have created some seats in some schools, and we'll continue to look at that for families whose priority is lower.
Right, that's the 2A, and I really appreciate that. I think we've got some work to do to market that, and that's going to take a different type of marketing. But I think it would be really strategic for us to work in that direction. So,
I think
you're right. Thank you,
Dr. Martin, and this, Mr. Martin. I would just say that, as we in long range planning with Ms. Rory and Glenn partner to look at some of the gentrification that we're seeing around certain areas of the county, I think we're going to have to begin to think differently and more strategic and intentional to create that two-way process that you've referred to. So just know that dialogue has started. We're, as Ms. Anderson-Powell noted, we're piloting it at a few schools, but I think as we learned through some of the RTI work, certain transportation barriers exist. So we're going to have to begin to think differently as we look at the county and the flow of students, and offering choice to all families, not just families necessarily in super high growth areas of Western Wake. So that is certainly on our radar in terms of our long range thinking. So I appreciate you highlighting that.
Thanks.
I would echo that, because we certainly have had those similar conversations in our office. So it is certainly something to think about as we move forward. And that's part of that visioning and that strategic planning that goes in as we start to think about a next grant cycle, really analyzing those areas where we might want to, where we might have gaps that we want to address. So that's a good point.
And from a granting perspective, having to write too many grants myself, right? You often want a grant that stands out as something that's unique. And this idea of, the other direction of the magnet is not something that I routinely have seen in magnet programs. And I think if we do it well, it could really be a unique differentiator for us, increasing the chances for funding.
Absolutely. Excellent point.
And I just have a quick question to follow up with that, and thank you for your questions, Dr. Martin. How funding would be available through different grants? I know there are more grants available to help fund magnet programs when we are supplementing the opportunity for the students who live in a base area that's typically more economically disadvantaged students. Is there the same amount of funding or funding available for the opposite?
So really the only grant funding that we have for magnet schools is the federal Magnet School Assistance Program grant. And it really looks at reducing the minority group isolation. So it could potentially go either way. We just have to be very strategic how we plan that. And I think to Dr. Martin's point, creating that differential could be very positive. It could have a lasting impression, but we would also want to show how it's positively impacting all the schools in the district. And that's what we typically have to do with the grant, is not just that it helps the magnet program, but it helps the district overall. So really looking at that long-range planning, all of those components go into that strategic visioning as we're thinking about that next grant cycle.
Absolutely, Ms. Lane, and thank you so much for sharing that.
If I could just jump in there, because I think to me that's part of the crux of the matter, and I think, going back to Superintendent Moore's comments about the review, because it seems to me, and I appreciate the sensitivity around gentrification and looking at our neighborhoods, but it seems to me that if we're looking at housing patterns and gentrification, and we're shifting students based on gentrification, then we're simply doing that. We're just shifting students, and I wonder if that's a sustainable strategy to look at, as opposed to, and going back to my question, I think this is what Ms. Cash is touching on in terms of programs. So if we're using, for example, a culturally responsive curriculum, then we're looking at using programs to attract students to a particular magnet, as opposed to just shifting students based on housing patterns. And that's two different strategies, it seems to me. And going back to Superintendent Moore's comments about, again, a magnet review, and are we doing, or are our programs doing what we're saying they're going to do? Or that, are they making the impact that we want? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Ms. Cash, either, but I think that's kind of what you were alluding to with regard to programs.
Well, I think that cultural sensitivity programs are really good when you're shifting students. I think it's a very complementary piece that we need to talk about. I think that's doable. Yeah, I understand.
And really, there's an and in what you're saying, because the programming is a piece of it, but how priority areas are identified in the application process is also a piece of it. So priority areas may change based on what we see happening in neighborhoods in different parts of the county. And programming may need to change based on what is needed in order to attract families, whether it's Group 2A or another Group 1 magnet. So I think there's an and in the middle of what you're saying.
And that certainly shifts regularly, too, as we see. I know there are sections of Ms. Kushner's district, for example, where you don't see as many younger students, there's not as many younger children living in where, and it's just a constant, organic, something to monitor. It's very fluid. Absolutely. Ms. Cash?
Well, and I think you're right. It's a very fluid, like you said. And I think as we're talking about magnets and programs and all the things that go along with it, we need to also look at the numbers with student assignment to be sure that our priority numbers, the percent of magnets we want in that student, how our lottery number, whether it's 10% or less, because that can really offset if your priority number applications are not high enough. So these are all very complicated formulas that have been used for years and years and years at the beginning. So it's a fun thing to look at, but we can look at it well, I think.
And may I just add compliments to this board and certainly Superintendent Moore. Wake County is known for how it works with its magnet programs across the country. And they are celebrated because of that fluidity you just spoke about, because it's not stagnant. It is ever changing and ever dynamic. Not just in the way we look at census tracts and the socioeconomic data, but also, as Superintendent Moore said, how we look at programming that has to attract that diverse population. So lots of credit to your work through the years to make it to be a national model. So just thank you for all of your support and great questions to keep us visioning forward.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lane. And then we have one question, or maybe more than one, from Ms. Kushner, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Ms. Scott, and I'll try to keep it short, but I do appreciate the information, Ms. Lane and Mr. Martin, on page 4 that gives us that national perspective that just Ms. Lane just mentioned, because I think it's incredibly important to focus on the magnets being choice with purpose that reduce poverty, high concentrations of poverty, and that serve that decades-long focus that Ms. Cash and Mr. Sutton and all of us have mentioned. I think it's incredibly important to lift up the work that school integration benefits all students. So thank you for pointing us in that direction. My specific question, and I'm thrilled to see the expansion of the global language programs and in so many schools. And I appreciate the need to have a K-12 pathway. I don't know if we need to get Broughton and Oberlin ready for all those students, but I do know we'll probably have some who want to return to their base middle and high schools. But as far as the immersion programs and school integration within the school, I know it's difficult if students come in not in kindergarten to be in that immersion program, but we also need to focus on making sure that it's not a segmented program. What are we doing to make those schools truly integrated and having that global language across the school, perhaps with some students being more intensive in an immersion, but what work is being done to make those schools really cohesive communities?
A lot.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to let Ms. Sherry Golden Perry speak to that if she will, because she has been intricate in preparing the ground for this work to do that very thing, because it is such an important offering in our community, but because of our magnet priorities and our principles, we also want to make sure that we are maintaining that diversity we're seeking to create. So, Sherry, will you share a little bit about your great work in this realm?
Thank you, Ms. Lane.
I hope that everybody's having a great day. I think the biggest thing that we've done at the new magnet schools is we're starting to offer daily world language. So students at the 3 new magnet schools will obviously have the global studies integrated into their regular classes, but one of their elective offerings can be language that they will take on a daily basis throughout their middle school experience. So that's separate from the immersion students. So everyone will have some touch of language, but families can choose to what degree that happens for their individual families.
So students get to choose whether it's immersion or daily, and then someone coming in, say in 3rd grade, who moves, because we do have a vibrant transient community, folks moving in and out of Wake County, that they can come in and do daily language.
Correct.
All right, thank you. And I do want to echo the support from some of my colleagues as far as, I know student assignment works so closely with y'all. We have such a great team with Magnet and student enrollment working together that I was glad to hear that we're keeping some seats just having that second chance magnet and having new families be able to opt in, because this has been such an unusual year for student enrollment. So I'm glad to hear the work continues. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Kushner. And one of our Magnet middle school principals actually a few weeks ago or a week ago tweeted the picture of, what people see and what's really going on underneath the surface, where you see the tip of the mountain, but underneath is the giant iceberg. And I certainly think of the work for our magnet programs exemplifies that, because my goodness, and I appreciate all of the information so far. Dr. Martin, I just wanted to make sure you didn't have a question. I saw your hand was still up.
Nope, sorry, I just forgot to take it down. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you. So thank you again so much to Ms. Lane and to Mr. Martin for your presentation, and for all of for everybody who helped put this together for us in our magnet school programming. And just as a time check, it's about 4:18, so we are transitioning over to the second part of our meeting today. And we'll be hearing about the behavioral health practices and mental health services. And I don't know, if Dr. McFarland, if you had anything else you wanted to say to introduce our next segment.
No, other than while they're pulling up the PowerPoint, Paul Coe, our Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services, will kick off the presentation. And then Dr. Marius Pettiford, our Senior Director for Counseling and Student Services, will share some of the slides as well. And then Debbie Richardson, the Director from Alliance Behavioral Health, is also here to share some information and answer questions from the board. So we look forward to this presentation. Paul?
Thank you, Dr. McFarland. And good afternoon, Committee Chair Scott, Superintendent Moore, and board members. In today's presentation, we wanted to provide you one aspect of our behavioral health practices, focusing on our mental health services. As it has been a topic of interest, we wanted to provide you what we hope to be a fuller picture of the ways in which we support the mental health of our students and families. And I'll be presenting with a couple of my esteemed colleagues, like Dr. McFarland mentioned, Dr. Marius Pettiford, Senior Director of Counseling and Student Services, Debbie Richardson, Director of Alliance Behavioral Health. And we also have some of our team members here as panel members available for questions when we get to the dialogue portion. Cam Lopes, Director of Special Education Services, Michael Pesch, Director of School Social Work, Brian Glendenning, Senior Administrator of Healthful Living, Kelly Lister, Senior Administrator, Crisis Prevention and Intervention, and Jill Harris-Velez, Bilingual School-Based Liaison. Our desired outcomes for today's meeting is as follows. We want to first provide an overview of the importance of mental health. And then here in the slides, I know it says SB 199, but we want to provide you with a large picture, a bigger picture of the laws, policies, and requirements for mental health supports. We also wanted to share example practices supporting mental health for students, families, and staff, provide an overview of our Alliance Healthcare Partnership and impact, and review next steps for our mental health services as we look to the future. And with behavioral health overall, we always like to provide a reminder of our larger why as a district. Our core beliefs 1 through 3 give us reminders of why we're working hard to support the social, emotional, behavior, and mental health of our students, families, and staff. And though I won't read these to you, but I hope that it is a familiar part of our compelling why. And if we can go to the next slide. Since March, we've really done a great deal of work to broaden our behavioral health lens from the general SEL, social emotional learning lens, to highlight all 3 components of behavioral health: social emotional learning, mental health, and behavior. And like I said before, in today's presentation, we will specifically focus on the mental health component of behavioral health. So first, when we think about mental health, sometimes there may be a stigma linked to mental health that we are only supposed to seek out help when we are at a breaking point. We're working to support our students, families, and each other to dispel this stigma. We know that good mental health is critical to children's success in school and life. Research demonstrates that students who receive social, emotional, and mental health support achieve better academically. School climate, classroom behavior, on-task learning, and student sense of connectedness and well-being all improve as well. Mental health is not simply the absence of mental illness, but also encompasses social, emotional, and behavioral health and our ability to cope with life's challenges. So to work in a focused manner to both maintain and grow our mental health services, our mental health services collaborative brings together professionals within the district and community to help address the mental health needs of our students. As you see here, this group includes representatives from our counseling and student services team, special education team, Alliance Health, community partners, several universities, mental health service providers, and parents. And originally, this group was comprised of student support services, special education services, Alliance Health, and a representative from the county manager's office. But since the pandemic and our efforts around behavioral health were intensified, a decision was made to expand the mental health team to become a collaborative team and to add additional stakeholders. That work included collaboration on the core reopening guidance document, supportive counseling model implementation, the formation of subcommittees of telecounseling and school-based mental health. And oftentimes legislation drives the work of this group, and it's the job of our mental health collaborative to provide us guidance and help to inform the way we can best approach our work to meet the legal mandates while keeping our focus on supporting our students and families. And as a friendly reminder, this slide lists policies that have relevance and connections to behavioral health and wellness in our district. In the first quadrant on the upper left are policies guiding our district in the ways we must create a safe environment in our schools. And below the quadrant are the policies in the 3000s focused on education programs. We want to note the policies focused on internet safety, school improvement plan, and our counseling program. In the upper right quadrant are policies in the 4000s focused on child abuse and related threats to child safety, where we made updates to our mandated reporting requirements back in March and April to stay current with the latest legislation, in addition to our code of student conduct and attendance. And in the final quadrant is policy 6140, focused on student wellness about physical, nutritional health and activities to promote wellness. This array of policies notes how mental health is connected to several policies in our district, whether safety in person in the school building, on the internet, or within school improvement plans or counseling programs. We have specific policies to ensure that our district is clear what we need to do as mandated reporters to protect our students from both child abuse and threats to their safety, and how we can create student wellness through the guidance around physical, nutritional health, along with the activities to promote wellness. And though each of these policies do not note a mental health policy per se, we know having these policies helps us create the most mentally healthy district environment. With that being said, though there may not be imminent changes we need to review as we did with policy 4240, 7312, it will be important for us to keep up with needs that arise in mental health services from this pandemic-filled school year and legislation as we move forward. And later on in the presentation, as I review a new state board policy, there may be a need for us to review policy 6140 to use the SHAC as a potential body to continue our proactive work in supporting mental health in our district. This slide shows the North Carolina laws impacting the work of behavioral health and the relevant North Carolina State Board policy and the impact and implications for the district. Senate Bill 199 was signed into law in November and is now Session Law 2019-245 and had a direct impact on our own policy 4240-7312. We made adjustments in our policy committee, and through the work of the committee, we were able to update our policy and guidance as a district to ensure our alignment to updates on our mandated reporting requirements. The goal of this law was to strengthen the sexual assault laws and added 2 new provisions, which include reporting to local law enforcement when appropriate and increase awareness through training. The staff awareness training that all WCPSS employees must take is essential in our work as mandated reporters to have the essential information in addressing the requirements of this law. This training details how to make a report and reinforces our mandated reporting responsibilities. In addition, some of the components of our training includes training on suicide risk, which outlines the referral process for suicide risk, and it's given in a training for school staff at the beginning of each school year. And it's provided by the student support services staff, comprised often of counselors, psychologists, social workers. And if a staff member happens to miss the training or is hired after the presentation, they are required to take an online course to receive this training. Also, our counselors, psychologists, social workers are mandated to take full-day training on suicide prevention protocols when they are hired, and then take a refresher course every 2 years. In addition to training staff in the 7th, 9th, and 12th grade, we implement an evidence-based program, Signs of Suicide, which is given to students by a student support services staff member. And at the end of the lesson, the students have the opportunity to speak with the counselor if they're worried about themselves or a friend being at risk of self-harm. Another part of this policy refers to additional training around teenage dating violence, which is part of this session law I just referenced, and sex trafficking prevention that are covered in our human trafficking prevention lessons given to our 7th, 8th, and 9th grades. Also, child sexual abuse prevention is done in all first grade classrooms utilizing a program called Funny Tummy Feelings. All of these prevention programs are presented by a student support services staff member that have been trained to conduct these lessons. And while we were in remote learning, coping lessons were developed for students in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 12th grade. These lessons focused on strategies to keep themselves safe, what warning signs to look for, and how to get help. There has also been a parent PowerPoint to inform parents about the warning signs and the resources available. And also within the session law is a school-based mental health policy that I will review in the next slide. The school-based mental health initiative is a policy adopted by the North Carolina State Board of Education regarding school-based mental health initiatives. The policy requires each district to develop a local school mental health improvement plan and engage in DPI-provided trainings. The policy requires us to develop a school-based mental health improvement plan with the following components: universal prevention through a focus on core instruction, curriculum, and environment to promote a socially and emotionally healthy school environment. The second component is early intervention for mental and social emotional health and wellness. And this is a way to develop systems of early intervention focused on assisting students who are experiencing issues at school or who are otherwise identified as at risk for mental and social emotional health or substance use issues. The third component is around referral, treatment, and reentry, and this is to facilitate student access to and transition within and between school and community-based mental health and substance use services. We're also encouraged to have a memorandum of understanding with local mental health and substance use providers serving our geographic area in which our district is located. And the MOU is to address the parties' respective roles and relationships and how we would coordinate referral, treatment, and follow-up to individual students. There's also a component where we must enact a suicide risk referral protocol to ensure timely and effective response to suicide threats. There's also a stakeholder engagement component where each district plan will provide for engagement of relevant stakeholders, including families, students, community providers, and cross-system partners, with the goal of building school, family, and community partnerships in coordination and sustaining of mental and social emotional health and substance use supports for students. And then there's a reporting component whereby September 15th of each year, each district will report to DPI on the content of the school-based mental health plan adopted by the district, including the mental health training program and suicide risk referral protocol, and prior year compliance with requirements of this policy. And then the final component is around the timeline. It notes that by starting July 1st of 2021, each district will adopt a plan for promoting student mental health and well-being, begin implementation of said plan, and commence school mental, social, emotional health, and substance use training programs. And this plan must be approved by the local governing board and reviewed at least every 5 years, beginning August 1st, 2025. So with our compelling why, mental health collaborative, and the legal and policy guidance, we have work we are sustaining and work we will have to develop to ensure the mental health of each of our students and families. And with that overview, I'm going to now pass it to Dr. Marius Pettiford, who will review some of the example practices of mental health services in our district currently.
Good afternoon. With this slide, this shows just a few examples of how the district has developed behavioral health and mental health services that are provided to staff in order to get them ready to provide those services and those supports to our students and families. If a staff member misses any of the trainings that we have a system in place that we are able to allow them to take the course online, such as the one for SB 199, or their refresher courses that individuals can sign up for throughout the year so that we don't miss any critical stakeholder in this important training. Other services that would also include our professional development, the district level guidance that we provide, access to research-based practices. One concrete example of a mental health training that we provide is the suicide screening. You know, we have a protocol that we use for assessing suicide risk. The referral process is given in a training for school staff at the beginning of each school year, provided by our student support services staff. However, our counselors, social workers, and psychologists are mandated to take more in-depth training. It's a full-day training on suicide prevention protocol. And they have to refresh every 2 years. And so we keep up with those lists and notify folks when it's their time to re-up their training. In our next slide, in the area of student and family support, staff members incorporate knowledge and practices around behavioral health in virtually every activity each day when working to assist students and families. This work is done on the individual, the school, and the district level. One example is our health education component. Health education is a mandatory instructional content for students in grades 6 through 8, and Healthful Living 1 is a course required for graduation in high school. Health education standards include mental and emotional health, interpersonal communications, relationships, nutrition, physical activity, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs awareness, and personal and consumer health. As mentioned before, we also have the Signs of Suicide curriculum that's offered in 7th, 9th, and 12th grade, which is an evidence-based curriculum. In addition, we have added the components of teenage dating violence, sex trafficking, as those are things that are mandated by Senate Bill 199. We also provide coping lessons in grades 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12. And this also would be a place where we do work in the elementary level with our Funny Tummies program. This next slide is a summary of the highlights of a few areas that we have provided guidance to families, such as the ability to access the Alliance staff directly during remote learning. We also outlined the process for school-based referrals for our Alliance Bridge to Success program, which allows school teams to refer students directly to Alliance with parental consent. We also have community-based supports. We have agreements with community agencies that can provide preventative and supportive counseling support, which do not rise to the level of mental health support needed for an Alliance referral. And finally, we also have CRIM and RP supports for each school to address building relationships and ensure trauma-informed practices are being developed. The other component that we've added in our work this year is our wellness support sessions for students, families, and caretakers. And we've offered things in the areas of the community resiliency model, restorative practices, and also some asynchronous virtual parent summits. The community resilience model provides sessions that allow parents to learn the tools of helping themselves and youth deal with stress. These sessions are inclusive to all who have an interest in learning, excuse me, and learning strategies and skills to better support their children and families during these uncertain times. Restorative practices is invitational, and it allows participants to share openly and encourages connections and deepening of relationships. This training is inclusive to all who have an interest, and it's also focused on things such as keeping kids emotionally and physically safe. Our asynchronous opportunities are where parents and students can receive the links to a panel of experts who have pre-recorded vignettes about their knowledge and skills on how to manage the changing COVID-19 stressors that have come into our lives during this pandemic. And finally, in this slide, we bring back the mental health collaborative diagram. And we want to draw your attention to the inner ring that connects all of the stakeholder groups. And in particular, the inner ring itself is where we have the school-based team listed. The funding for the school-based team is from Wake County Board of Commissioners that is allocated to Alliance Health for specific use for mental health services for schools. At this time, I introduce Debbie Richardson, Director of School-Based Behavioral Health for Alliance Health, to present her portion of the program as we talk about this specific program of school-based teams.
Thank you, Dr. Pettiford. Good afternoon, Committee Chair Scott, Superintendent Moore, and board members. I wanted just to briefly talk about Alliance Health and some definitions with background about the school-based team as part of this presentation. Alliance Health is the managed care organization, often called MCO, that serves Medicaid clients in Wake, Durham, Johnston, and Cumberland counties. As part of being an MCO, Alliance's network of providers offers treatment and support regarding mental health issues, substance use disorders, and intellectual developmental disabilities. And there's been a change of intellectual developmental disabilities. Sometimes you'll hear that called long-term services with some of the changes. As part of Wake County Government Strategic Behavioral Health Plan, Alliance was given funding to help develop this program in partnership with Wake County Public Schools, and that program is what we're going to be discussing in this presentation. The school-based program was developed to help support the behavioral health needs of Wake County Public Schools students. It is based in a system of care, person-centered, and integrated care model. Really models, 3 models. So over the past 6 calendar years, this program was developed in partnership with Wake County Public Schools and is often called the Bridge to Services program. It is built to help connect Wake County Public School systems to mental health and substance use treatment providers, medical care, and wraparound services as needed. The goal of this program is to help increase positive academic outcomes and to improve the overall health and well-being of students in Wake County Public Schools by providing effective and timely assistance with linking students to care. And I really want to stress the effective and timely assistance because that has been really a key and one of our key performance indicators with the 7 different programs. As indicated on this slide, the school-based team works with all insurance providers. So even though Alliance MCO serves Medicaid, this particular program serves all insurance providers. So that would be Medicaid from Wake County, Medicaid from other counties, Medicaid coming in from other states, private insured, uninsured, working with families that may have difficulty with needing providers to serve pro bono, working with NC State in partnership. So it really is a comprehensive program looking at all children with all insurance types. So the school-based team links students with a comprehensive clinical assessment, often called a CCA, within 14 days of the referral. So we assist to link to that as well as linking at the same time to any community partners and wraparound services. As part of the integrated care model, We link students with medical treatment providers as needed, and we also help identify the barriers and gaps that that they need help with, such as social determinants of health, to access these services. As we're linking and working to link students to services, the team provides ongoing updates and communication to the referral source from Wake County Public Schools and leadership as needed, as well as they are communicating with us simultaneously in real time to support the families. We provide alerts to Wake County Public School leadership regarding crisis daily. So kids in crisis, we're giving daily updates, and we're alerting about serious school threats as needed. We invite Wake County Public School staff to attend child and family team meetings in partnership with the systems and providers serving the students. We, as a team, support and are one with Wake County Public Schools and the various mental health fairs, community events, and really work together. I think in the last school year, we probably did close to 40 community events with Wake County Public Schools. And starting this year, we were providing system of care and child family team trainings to the district as part of the program. During COVID-19, the team activated in partnership with schools to really provide supports for the COVID housing, emergency housing projects, as well as food insecurity. And last but not least, as a little summary over the last 6 calendar years, the team was awarded 2 state awards for different partnerships. In 2019, in partnership with Easter Seals Cares, we won a Quality Commitment Award for what is called CARES program, which is effective and a very quick linkage to services. And then in 2017, with Wake County Schools, we won the Excellence Award from the NC Council of Community for improvement of services. Next slide, please. On this slide, we're going to really talk about some of the specializations of the model. School-based team provides Wake County Schools with a very high level of support to address treatment barriers and social determinants of health. Some of the specialties that we as partners have developed over the last 6 years are intellectual and developmental long-term services care coordination, a justice liaison, a psychiatric residential coordination program, and most times people will call that a PRTF, but I wanted to sound it out for everybody. So we have in this program 2 dedicated PRTF Alliance school-based liaisons, and they work closely with 2 identified Wake County School social workers that are housed in special education. And as part of their work together, they coordinate the reconnection of the student's discharge back to school and community with a KPI, a goal of linking that child back to school within 10 days of discharge, as well as linking all systems together to support the provider and the schools with linkages for crisis planning and the families being part of that CFT that links them back together. The liaisons themselves with the school social workers while the child is at the psychiatric residential treatment facility participate in community team meetings with that facility for whatever the length of stay is for that child to help plan for that discharge. Other areas of specialization are early childhood care coordination, a family engagement program. We have an embedded alternative school care coordinator who's housed at the alternative schools, and we have a crisis coordination program. We also have a bilingual, an English-Spanish speaking care coordinator. I think it was 2 years ago, we had a 35% increase in our referrals for our Hispanic population. So and that care coordinator is Jill Harris-Velez, who is on the panel with us today. As part of our care coordination program, we have Alliance school-based crisis liaisons embedded at our crisis facilities. So we have Wake County, I call it Wake County and Alliance, have really great liaisons based at Wake Med and Holly Hill, Wake Brook, and cover all of our EDs, as well as the planning to cover the new Child Crisis Center that will open next school year. As part of the child care coordination with crisis, our liaisons are reviewing all admissions coming into crisis facilities that we are alerted about from the teams actually at the facilities, and we're screening those to see which ones are our Wake County Public School kids, and those are the ones we begin to serve. So the first part of our process is to really coordinate with the families and obtain a release of information form that allows immediate and effective communication with Wake County Public Schools while the child is in the crisis. We provide daily crisis updates to the Wake County leadership, many people that are actually on the panel, and they in turn give us information that the crisis facilities may need to best help support that child. So it's very real-time exchange of information. We coordinate with all systems, so whatever systems may be involved with that child, whether it's juvenile justice or CPS or whoever the family feels needs to be involved or to be a support, we coordinate to help that discharge back to school and community from the crisis episode. And in 2018, Dr. Pettiford and I were invited to speak at the General Assembly to the NC House Special Committee on Safe Schools about the development over the last years of how we developed this program and the success we've had in supporting with the Bridges program. Next slide, please. On this slide, we really wanted just to show that the program that began in 2015-16 started with 94 children being served in 46 schools. And then as you can see, the increase going right to left in 2016-17, that increased to 221 students in 64 schools. And then in 2017-18, that went to 505 children in 117 schools. And then in 2018-19, we were referred 624 children and we touched 174 schools. So we wanted to show the progression that once the program was implemented and really partnering and work and with issues around stigma, you could see that the referrals really have consistently increased. Next slide, please. The total number of students served has been 1,444. And on this slide, we just really wanted to highlight what we had discussed on slide 16 is the breakdown of the various insurances that have been referred to the program. So on this final slide, this is reflective of the students that were linked to mental health treatment as part of the Wake County and Alliance Bridge to Services. And this provides an overview of the various types of insurance that the students had at the time of referral. So this concludes my portion of the presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to share about the school-based team partnership, and I'll pass it back to Mr. Coe.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson, for your insights. As you can see, we have some great work being done in our teams that are supporting the mental health of our students and families, and that goes from a core standpoint to when we need more differentiated support for our students and families who need more intensified supports. So beyond dispelling any stigmas attached to mental health, we're ensuring that there are concrete practices to support safety, well-being, and ensuring that we have these core practices and crisis response strategies in our work of mental health services. And moving forward, we will have to review some of our policies to align with the latest guidance from our State Board of Education, develop our school-based mental health improvement plan, and overall, we will continue to research and explore resources for the implementation and delivery of school-based mental health services in support of the overall behavioral health of our students. And some of the examples that we will be to further supplement our work is to think about an extension of supportive counseling, which has proven to be successful to our students. Several large and surrounding counties are doing this practice and have been for several years to help meet the needs of students without having them to spend valuable time away from a school day to travel to appointments or who may not even seek services. And then we're also looking at telehealth platforms to help with service delivery, which has become a necessity during this pandemic to offer these services virtually. So again, we thank you for your time and your attention and the opportunity to present about mental health services under the umbrella of behavioral health. And so we'll pause here now for any questions or dialogue.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Richardson and Dr. Pettiford and Mr. Coe. Truly appreciate all of the information provided and especially going into a little bit more detail about some of the programming that exists. As someone who has personally struggled with anxiety and depression my whole life and had suicidal thoughts as a teen, I was extraordinarily lucky that we had an available counselor when I was in high school who wasn't off doing, you know, another duty on top of another duty on top of another duty. There was a person there when someone reached out, you know, to her out of concern. And so the mental health is extraordinarily important, and especially as we think of I think everyone in this room has had the opportunity to view and participate in discussions around the resilience documentary that focuses on ACEs and adverse childhood experiences. And the key takeaway from that is that the body remembers what the mind forgets. And we do know that these are lifelong impacts. And I'm so very thankful that that not only our schools are doing this work and that Wake County is able to step in. And again, this shows the multiple services outside of providing your basic education to students that our public schools are providing, and the work that we do. So I had to say that before we get started on questions. And I saw Mr. Haggerty's hand is up.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Scott. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Coe, for the presentation. I want to say that this is an issue that I prioritize very highly in regarding to our work in the schools, and I want to compliment you on the presentation, the very detailed analysis of what you've done to put some of these new state directives into practice. I think there's a lot of work has been done. I think there's more work to do, but I think all of this is very definite, very positive progress. I have two questions. The first of which is, I've gone and I've read the State Board of Education Policy, SHLT 003. And when you went through some of your next steps, one of the things that you talked about was the need to review our policies at the Wake County level. And I'd like to say that I agree strongly. I think that an issue of this importance deserves a place in our policy manual. If you look at our student support service policies, we have policies on EpiPen injections, head injuries, nutrition, and I really think behavioral mental health, particularly as it relates to youth suicide prevention, merits its own individual policy. And so I know this is the Student Achievement Committee, but we are lucky enough to have our board members present, so many of our board members present here today. I'd like to ask all of them if they'll join me in committing to pursuing a district-wide policy that reflects the goals of the state policy and captures and supports the work that you all are doing. Is that something that you think the staff might be able to assist with?
Mr. Haggerty, first of all, thank you so much for your comments and your passion around this topic. I think the more that we have folks talking about mental health, the more that it will, talking about how we need support will become normalized. And then I think in the work of policy review, I think we have to both look at and analyze the current policies we have and see if we need to make any adjustments, but also think about, like you mentioned, any additional policies that specifically focus on the mental health practices that the state board is asking us to make sure to document, but more importantly, implement on a regular basis. So I think those are all things that we need to look at within the policy committee and maybe the larger board.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. And again, this might be more solicitation of other board members for support or a call to action. So I'll just direct this toward them. This is something that I think we can do, that we have the time and the mandate to do. And I'd like to see us take this on and make progress in this direction within the next 2 years. So thank you for that. Mr. Coe, my last question is, I do want to talk about, and I know this is a little bit sensitive, how we are able to effectuate these plans in a virtual environment, and the challenges that we have with a number of our students in Virtual Academy, the number of students that we have that may not have frequent time in the classrooms. Are you finding challenges in being able to pursue these policies as we try to serve those students, and what can we do to help or to improve that situation?
Mr. Haggerty, thank you for bringing up that question as well. I would say, first of all, being in person versus virtual in relation to how to track the mental health of our students on a daily basis, there's a difference, right? For example, for students who are in 3 cohort rotations, just the frequency of in-person contact does make a difference. However, if you remember our last presentation where we had several, during our work session last week, if you heard from some of the quotes that folks shared, our student support services teams, despite the fact that we are in this kind of blended in-person and virtual environment, they're doing a lot of work to keep connected with families and make sure that they're connected to both resources, or if there's crisis, that they're connected to crisis response. But I would say there are challenges because, throughout the course of this pandemic, I think some of the isolation of quarantining and lack of social access does create conditions where folks are dealing with more of things like loneliness or sadness or depression that maybe wouldn't, that are harder to bring to light if we were, daily. However, I would say that our teams are doing the best we can, but I think some of the things that we'll have to think about is that until the pandemic goes away, thinking about things like how we can pursue the telehealth platform so that instead of waiting for a student to return to in-person to then see them about how to support them, we could get more immediately to those therapeutic services on top of what we're doing with Alliance Health.
Thank you. And if going forward, if there are things that we can do to help support that, whether it's as we put together our budget, as we approach legislators and county commissioners or others, please let us know what more that we can do to support your work. Thank you, Mr. Coe.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for your questions, Mr. Haggerty, and certainly understanding the intersection of the work of all of our committees and the leadership of our board. I'll, of course, let Chair Sutton and Ms. Kushner, continue to guide, and Ms. Cash, let this move forward and ideally maybe bring this up in other capacities. So thank you so much for your questions. Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you. And thank you so much. I noticed and I appreciate the link that's on slide 14 to the WCPSS wellness page. I'm curious if in our back to school landing page where we're keeping information, if we can link to that page on the social emotional health. I know there we talk about masking, we talk about and have some social stories, but I think if families, if they're on this page, can get at least a way to access, I'm not saying completely replicate, but at least access the resources that are on that page, I think that would be very helpful. And then just something to look into under where it says domestic violence and sexual assault programs for resources. The link goes to a NC Department of Administration page, and I don't know if that's the landing page that we want there, or if it's Interact or another place. But I was just clicking through, and I didn't know. And again, that one is not something that needs to be answered here. But again, I appreciate that, and I'm hoping it can at least be linked to in many different areas, because I think it's a great page that just has some concrete resources for folks.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. We'll look into that in partnership with our communications team.
And I think we do, are you, Ms. Mahaffey, I just want to clarify for my own notes and understanding, are you talking about the, like the updates, the landing page for the back to school 2021?
Yeah, so when I click the link on the slide, it takes us to a regular WCPSS website, .net/wellness, but I'm hoping as we talk about the landing page where our updates are for COVID-19 resources, given the issues that have arisen, at least again, having a link going to this page, I think may be helpful for some families as they're looking for resources.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some things can get a little hidden sometimes. Thank you so much. Ms. Carter?
Right, and thank you again for this presentation. I think the more information folks have is just so helpful during these times. And kind of going on what Ms. Mahaffey was saying about communication with families, I just really would like to stress more communication. I know something was sent out last week about it, but so many families, you know, you get busy, you don't see it, you might not need it. And when I went to that link, I noticed for Alliance Health, it has on there that it's for people who are, that's on the Wake County Wellness site. It says serves people who are insured by Medicaid or uninsured. But as the presentation today showed, it's also private insurance. So I was just trying to see if that information can be updated, and then also what other ways we can look at, like what Ms. Mahaffey stated about the other website, and also maybe school-specific websites. Because I just think that is what I've been hearing from families around counseling and needing different supports and unable to get it in the community. And then once they learned about this, it was a game changer for them. So I just think the more that we can do to inform families specifically would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. And just to note that we can work on getting it out to our individual schools, and then we'll continue thinking about how to more frequently communicate so that it's just more of an ongoing process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Ms. Kushner?
Thank you, Ms. Scott. And I, in that Mr. Hegarty raised policy, and I know on slide 8, the staff has highlighted the policies that are encompassing behavioral health and mental health services. But I wanted to ask Mr. Hegarty, do you want to set aside a specific policy on suicide prevention or on the school-based mental health policies reflected the State Board of Education's policy that each school have a local school mental health improvement plan? I'm trying to clarify for Mr. Hegarty what specific policy he is seeking.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. So if you look at our policy manual right now, and I did see what was referenced in Mr. Coe's presentation, but I don't see a strong behavioral health-based policy regarding youth suicide prevention, which is my real focus. And I think that we could do more based on the other policies in the manual, taking the direction from the State Board of Education's policy. I didn't come to this meeting with a draft prepared, of course, but I do think that there is work that we can do, in this direction. I don't think that what we have is sufficient.
No draft was, I think it merits discussion. And I think it merits talking whether that should be part of our wellness policy, so that we don't, because I think part of the issue of mental health is that we talk about it separate from physical health. And I think it would be healthier if we, I think it's something to discuss if we want it to be, if we want to be more holistic in how we view wellness. But I think that's for another time to have another discussion, and certainly to get Mr. Coe and his team's views on that. But I certainly think the policy focus of this, that the board should look at that as a policy issue. So thank you for raising that, Mr. Hegarty. And more specifically to the state board policy, so every school now, as I take it, a public school unit, is that the district has to have a improvement plan, or every single school has to have a improvement plan? Mr. Coe, I'm a little unclear as to the intent of the state board policy.
Ms. Kushner, how I read it, and from our attorneys, what they said was that I think it is all public school entities, and it could be at the school level or the whole, like however we define the unit of the school system. With, for us, we're a fairly large system, so both our district and all the schools will be responsible for making sure to enact school-based mental health practices.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you for that, Ms. Kushner. Ms. Cash, I know you have your hand up. I'm going to hop over to Dr. Martin really quick.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Partly related, to, just extending on the last observation, there's a lot of reporting and guidance and plans that are coming out of the legislature, all of which I support and think are important. What I wanted to highlight is it's a little frustrating that these are yet another unfunded mandate, because our counselors and social workers and psychologists their caseloads are already too high. When you go to a school for like a ramp analysis or whatnot, the caseloads that our current SEL practitioners are bearing are a bit unrealistic. And so, it's kind of a double-edged sword. A lot of these plans and everything and training is extremely important, but I just want to use this time to reemphasize that we need more counselors in our schools. We need more social workers in our schools, more psychologists, more nurses, the whole thing. So in order to enact this, in order to implement it, we need more than just policy from the State Board of Education and the legislature. We need actual funded positions. Thank you.
Certainly agree with that. Thank you, Dr. Martin. Ms. Cash.
So one of the things I would like to explore, and is, when we did the policy on vaping, and we also had the Post Center did a great campaign on vaping, because vaping was a killer, suicide's a killer, and I know our young people, our counselors are overburdened. We have great counselors in our high schools and middle schools, but I know that a lot of students don't exactly still know where to go, because they don't have a family necessarily helping them along the way, and their family's not always aware. I wish we could do something similar like we did with vaping, whether there be a policy, but also some type of a campaign about the phone numbers and the help that we have available for our students, so our students have the ability to know what they can do themselves, not depending on their parents.
Ms. Cash, thank you for that suggestion. I think that's something that we can take to the mental health collaborative team and see what ways, in addition, because we have some parents who are part of that team, but see how we can get the student perspective and figure out what kind of campaign we can roll out. So thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you. That'd be helpful. I appreciate it.
Ms. Cash, you reminded me that Youth Thrive has a GIS mapping, and I don't know how different mental health professionals buy into it, but they map different mental health providers throughout the county. So in addition to Alliance, I don't know if that's a helpful resource for families, but I know I believe we work with them with our bullying campaign as well, so maybe they have, so we're not doing this alone, but knowing there are partners through the county that are interested and invested in this and well.
So would that be like a resource that we could give to students, or would that be like we'd link her? I mean,
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I know Mr. Coe has some probably better insight on that than I do.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Coe, you work well with Post Center. They did a really good vaping campaign. Maybe between and all the people that you work with, that would be just an idea that maybe we could meet our high school students where they are. And thank you, Ms. Mahaffey.
Yeah, I think those are both great suggestions where, our work with the Post Center and also the work with our Shack, those are places we can look how we can have more of a student-facing campaign or initiative around how to just encourage mental health for our students and how to access supports in general.
And maybe how to talk to your parents if you're having an issue, because I think that for some kids that may be the barrier is, I don't know how to talk to my parents about this.
Thank you to both of you for that, Ms. Cash. That's a great idea, and Ms. Mahaffey, thanks for sharing the Youth Thrive information. And that's an excellent point. When having a conversation with a parent who was concerned about their student, they did share that they themselves had never had access to therapy, that they'd never had mental health supports. And so this is still newer for many people who for whatever reason have not had that access, and anything we can do to let people know this is part of your whole wellness is very important. I appreciate that. Ms. Johnson-Hausler, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. And great segue to go behind Mrs. Cash, because I actually was going to bring exactly up a awareness campaign. I mean, again, working from home, my meetings started early this morning, and the first thing on a call was, many of you probably have seen, but the number of suicide rates in another school district who was in California, actually, who was on the national news. And so everybody on my call wanted to talk about this. And one of the things that dawned on me is I do this every day in my day job. Ms. Mahaffey gets to look at all of my work campaigns that I share for feedback from her. But I do think campaigns work. We know it works for young people. And while I don't disagree, it's important we help parents and students start talking about these issues. I also think it's important, especially for young people, to know that they have resources that they can contact on how to talk to their parents. So, and that's what a lot of mental health therapists are able to do with young people, is help facilitate that conversation. So I feel like that's less of our role, but making sure that we advertise resources where students can get that support. And from what I understand from families I've referred to Alliance Health, that a lot of their mental health workers do that. I also know that our schools do it as well. But again, we've all echoed the sentiments of how heavy and loaded their plates are. So the more resources for our young people, both on how to get treatment on the issue, but also how to talk to their families and how to navigate what they're going through as young people, especially now. So I think the campaign is an excellent idea. Poe Health Center is certainly one avenue, but we actually have, other North Carolina, Wake County based organizations like Hope NC. The helpline is also specifically for young people, and resources here that we can be tapping into that are very specific to each mental health issue, which our website does a good job of outlining some of those resources. The second piece was the idea that I think might be helpful so I'm getting the exact opposite request of parents are being inundated by a whole lot of information and they can't sort through it all. So my actually thinking was, and Mr. Simmons, happy to chat with you offline about this, but rather than increasing the communication, we actually add the consistent content to every single communication. So instead of overwhelming parents, every month there's a link to the wellness. Every month there's a link to the school calendar. Because I think we all can probably give you the top 10 things that people contact us about or need information and resources on. So if they're consistently in our newsletters or e-news blast that we send out, then it's much easier for parents to kind of categorize and know every email you send me, I'm going to be able to find these things that I'm looking for. Because essentially now that's all I'm doing is cutting and pasting the links that people request of me most frequently. And of course, they have them in their emails, but I do think they're getting overwhelmed by the emails that their schools send, but also the ones that they get from the district. And nobody wants the information to stop, but they are saying that it's difficult to sort through because of the millions of things parents have going on. So Mr. Simmons, I'd certainly like to talk about, is that an option in, I don't know what platform you all are using, but I certainly know it's possible, like in Constant Contact and other email platforms, to include the ongoing links every single mailing so that they're always there so people can always easily get back to them. So that was the second thought I had for communication. The last thought I have, which may be happening, Mr. Coe, in a lot in the school-based work that's happening, but certainly I also, unfortunately, we all know that our teachers are often the first person that our young people disclose to or attempt to disclose to. So I'm curious if there's kind of very similar to the work that we've done around Senate Bill 199. Are there key things or indicators that we can equip our teachers with that are identifiers or red flags, is what we call them in our day job, that teachers can be alerted to then say to the supports inside the school, hey, this is a student who mentioned this. Can somebody reach out to them? So I'm just curious if they already have access for teachers to just say, here are 5 things that you need to consider that might be an appropriate referral for a student.
Thank you for that question, Ms. Johnson. Also, I'm actually going to see if our resident expert, Kelly Lister, actually is able to add some insights to that question. Kelly, are you available?
I am. thank you for letting me share. And I appreciate all of the passion that's going around this subject matter. It's what I have been doing for the county since 2007. And I do believe there's a lot of things that you all are suggesting that we are already focusing on. And one of them, the Signs of Suicide, which is an evidence-based program, does a lot of the kind of the campaigning you all were speaking about, as far as giving kids warning signs with vignettes that they can look at, and also then kind of what to look for, but then also what do I do when I feel or see these things in other friends or in myself. That's done in the 7th, 9th, and 12th grade. 12th grade is kind of a booster shot, and the focus goes from how do you help friends possibly to how do you help yourself? How do I get insurance? How do I get support from me? Because they're thinking we're leaving, going off to college or into the workforce. So there's a lot of push about how to get help and what warning signs to look for yourself or for a friend. And I've actually seen and been in the county long enough that there's been a culture shift where when we first started out with this program, there was a message that kids were kind of telling on each other if they came forward, if they were concerned for someone's safety. And now that is not the case. It is not taboo to come forward and say, I'm worried about my friend or I'm worried about myself. We are finding there to be a lot more open communication. And I think this program has a lot to do with that becoming more of the norm, to share concern for their friend rather than keep it to themselves and hold the burden to themselves. We want to continue to do this work. And we really have started from, like Dr. Pettiford and Mr. Coe said earlier, about starting in first grade with that funny tummy feeling. And then there are coping skill lessons all the way through, addressing ways to take care of yourself if you're worried about yourself or if you're worried about a friend. And it's covered all the way through with specific lessons on the human trafficking prevention and on suicide prevention in the middle and high school levels. So I feel like there's a lot of things that we're addressing. And they're also right now during the remote, I think that question came up, is how are we handling this during remote? The human trafficking and signs of suicide lessons that are done in person cannot be done the same way virtually, because at the end of those lessons, there is a place to say, I need to speak to somebody, I'm worried about myself or a friend, which can typically lead to a screening for risk. And so the way we're trying to give prevention information during this virtual time is we've created specific lessons that are going to be done in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 12th, because we've missed kids with the signs of suicide possibly last year when we went into virtual learning, that they didn't receive those lessons. So we're trying to kind of play catch up to get that information out there and giving them some guidance on what to do. We've created that those lessons are going to be done by the end of this semester, and also a parent presentation that does not have to be something they view with someone. It's going to be on websites for schools that give warning signs, risk factors, and we're specifically looking for them to recognize, and understand the difference between kind of normal teenage things that are going on and when might we need to get extra help because this has lasted more than a couple of weeks or it's really starting to affect daily functioning, and explaining and trying to understand the difference. And right now there's also parent presentations that are virtually being done myself and one of my coworkers that we're providing for parent lessons to talk about that. And that's been we haven't had huge numbers, but we've had the people that have come. It's created a community of parents working together to try to protect children, and trying to come up with brainstorm together about ways during virtual learning and isolation, how can we make connections for kids? So there's a whole lot being done to try and empower parents and children and students on how to keep themselves safe or a friend. I went on longer than I probably needed to, but I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the passion and commitment to try to even improve. We also did work with Youth Thrives. They actually did a specific work towards suicide prevention. And from that we had different groups. We worked with different categories, parents, students, faith communities, on why people don't feel like they can talk openly about suicide, and gained a lot of information. So Youth Thrives has helped us, and we've been working as a team to try to figure out how do we reach kids in different ways and in different communities, because we all need to be hearing it in faith communities and out in the public to protect our children. It needs to go way further than just in the school system to put out that information and reduce the stigma of talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And I certainly, as a parent recipient, we didn't get ninth grade, but I certainly remember, and my daughter still remembers the work from seventh grade. So I certainly am very well aware of what we currently do for our students. I think two things. My question, and I can't speak for Ms. Cass, but I was actually talking about an actual real campaign, like a media campaign that's more of a blitz using, quite frankly, for young people on social media. I can tell you for our human trafficking and sexual assault, we ran a statewide campaign, and the number of young people that we engaged, of course, as no surprise, was very significant. Ages 14 to 18 was our largest number of young people who interfaced with our social media campaign. That was really about, here are signs that sexual violence is happening. And actually, it was also for sexual harassment as well. So I was actually speaking broadly, not necessarily something your department would do, but again, more of a communication social media tool. The second piece was identifiers for teachers. For instance, do teachers know that if a student professed like a declaration that that's a number one sign of suicidal ideation? That's what I mean. Like, are our teachers equipped now that they're virtual to hear kind of some of those top, I think it's 5 that Helpline uses for notes on suicide ideation that you can often recognize in a young person without them disclosing to them?
Yes, and I'm grateful for that. There was, right when we got into the pandemic, Dr. Pettiford created, what to do if you hear these things for teachers, because we're expecting teachers to go outside of their wheelhouse and recognize things that they, haven't necessarily been trained on specifically with mental health well-being. So yes, we do it. We've had documents for them to follow, but more than that, we also in the staff awareness training at the beginning that's required for every person to attend that works for Wake County Public Schools, gives those warning signs, risk factors, and more importantly, what do I do if I hear or see these things? And that covers not just suicide risk, self-injury, but homelessness and our human trafficking risk for kids as well. So, but I do think I like your idea and suggestion about maybe blitzing out top 5 things people might say that could indicate they're at risk. So I really like focusing on that, maybe even more specifically. I don't think we can do less. I think always more. And I like your idea of a campaign.
Thank you as always. And thank you, Ms. Lister, and thank you, Paul and Dr. Pettiford, all of you, for all the work you do. I know that I always got a million things here, and I also recognize you all are also doing millions of things. So I always want to be clear that I appreciate the work that you all are doing. And again, it's a place where I certainly will continue to say that if our students are not mentally and psychologically well, then they don't do well academically. And so that's going to always be kind of a place that I hang my hat. So I appreciate you all dealing with all of my questions and comments. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Osler.
Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson-Hessler, and to all of my colleagues for your questions and comments. And thank you again to Mr. Coe, to Dr. Pettiford, Ms. Lister, Ms. Richardson. We appreciate all of the information in this presentation. Such important work, particularly over the last 12 months. So that is if there are no other questions, we did go about 25 minutes over today. So I do want to thank our staff who stayed late, to all of those who have tuned in. But as always, really important information today. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 22nd. And with that, everyone stay safe on very wet roads, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.